our modern day Babylon society is trying to change manhood into womanhood.
There are clearly differences between men and women.
Men from the beginning of time, from the time of Adam, have been given the role to be the ones responsible for the family unit.
There is an ideal, and if we lose the ideal, then all you have left is margins. And then there's no grounding, if that makes sense. We have to be grounded. There has to be some sort of foundation. And we have to be okay with some people on the margins, because there's always going to be people on the margins.
That's reality.
But if you're going to say, well, we can't have an ideal because that marginalizes the people outside, well, then all you're left with is a margin. And that's when societies then crumble, because there's no grounding spot. Welcome to the No Bushel Podcast. We are your hosts, Big Ben and the Burning Bushmen. What are we talking about today, Kendall?
Today we are going to talk about manly men and the need for manly men.
Yes.
And the lack that we have in society today, right? So why masculinity is a good thing, and maybe why we see a deterioration of that masculinity, and also just kind of the importance of fathers and husbands and sons, just good moral guys.
Yeah, I really don't want to be married to a manly woman. I'm just saying. I mean, So in some ways, the culture is saying men need to be less manly, and women need to fill the role of the man. And so we need to be able to embrace our differences without being overly critical of the differences, and recognize that these differences are divinely attuned, and that our happiness is going to be best when we align ourselves with that divine ideal.
Mm-hmm. The only one that
Exactly.
had the responsibility or the consequences for the actions.
However, I think that their story also illustrates just human nature and some of the natural differences between men and women, and why maybe this ideal is important. Is Eve really was the leader in that she was the first to partake of the fruit. Right? And this is something that I think through most of Christendom has been misunderstood. The idea that we are all fallen because of Eve's sin, and that this was a sin, this was not a part of God's plan, and that this is the first evil that entered into the world.
A truly manly man is much more worried about what he can do for others, specifically his wife and his children, than he will ever be concerned about his own well-being.
Good. So to start off, we always like to remind everybody to like and subscribe. If you want to hear thoughtful content on hard conversations, things that we strive to be bold, teaching truth as we understand it. We're not going to say we get everything perfect, but we hope you can gain more courage as you speak with those around you to speak truth.
Definitely. So like and subscribe and share with your family and friends.
When it comes to men, we live in a world that feminism has told men that they are bad. And
pretty much, yeah.
That the tendencies that men have are really evil and should be suppressed. And the change of language, we've talked about the change of language in the past, and I think that kind of relates here, because it used to be that masculinity was good, but there was toxic masculinity, and the boundary between those seems to be creeping over, so that really any masculinity is being discussed as toxic. Exactly. So we need to be careful in our terms in discussing today that we do believe there is a point where masculinity can be toxic, or that we're not promoting that. However, we do want to promote the God-given attributes of masculinity that do give men specific responsibilities and roles, and the value of those roles.
Right. I think that the the key indicator here is, and what defines it is, masculinity in and of itself is good, but untrained masculinity is where we get into that toxic culture. And I think that speaks to the societal norms of the lack of fatherhood and parental figures in the home. When you have a father figure in the home that is teaching good principles and is active in their child's life, whether it's through school or church or sports, is an active member of what they do on a day-to-day basis, that allows the father to train their son in how to be respectful, honorable, good, kind, versus when there's not an active member. Now, that still includes people that have a father in their home, but if that father is not actively engaged, then they are missing out on those aspects that I just mentioned, that respect and motivation and guidance. And that's where you get that untrained masculinity that becomes toxic, in my opinion.
So some of the attributes that men tend to promote or to be, if you will,
mm-hmm.
it's not necessarily their natural tendencies that we're promoting or depromoting. We're saying that they do need to be trained and honed
yep.
to be God-given manhood.
Right.
Or divinely inspired attributes of man.
Exactly. Like, for instance, let's talk about men's inherent physical nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are a rougher group, right? We are a little bit more physically dominant, and that's just a fact. That's the way we are as men versus women, and in certain cases, that physical dominance is a great thing, right? You look at, for instance, the military, right? Most of the military are men, and it's because men are typically more physically able and stronger and can, that just fits in we want to get out there and punch something sometimes, right? We want to get out there and fight. And when we're trained properly, that physical dominance, that physical nature can be an honorable thing, because we can go out and we can fight for our country. We can fight for our loved ones. We fight for the things we believe in.
Protect.
Yeah. Exactly. That protection side of things. But if it's an untrained physical nature, then it becomes that toxic side where it can be an abusive relationship where, stereotypically, men are the ones that are a little bit more physical in domestic violence, right? I think we talked about that in one of our other videos. And so that's kind of the difference between a trained physical masculinity versus an untrained physical masculinity. One that brings honor and respect and protection versus one that totally is the opposite of all of those.
Yeah. I like that. And men need to be able to be trained. And you mentioned the fathers. We have an epidemic of fatherlessness. Yeah. And this is bad for young women and bad for young men. And men then look to their society. If they don't have a father in the home, then they look to their society. And what do young men go to in society as far as media? Shoot 'em up games,
Yep. get on your video games.
And media, entertainment, what movies that show men as lustful
idiots.
Yeah, idiots. Yeah, basically.
Yeah. How many videos have you watched or movies in the last 10 years, and the father of the home was just this bungling idiot that had no control over anything that was going on in the house. The wife was doing everything because he had no idea what was going on, and that is not a good example of what men should be, right?
And even when men are shown as being courageous and dependable, then they take another trait. So we mentioned physical from a strength standpoint, but then there's the sexual side. Men tend to be more sexual in nature, and even if there's a man in a movie who is viewed as good, if you will,
he's the hero of the movie.
He's the hero of the movie, but he, in almost all cases in modern media, will also be sexually deviant and just be the guy who goes and has sex with everybody, which is not a truly trained. And so young men then grow up with these views of manhood, which, maybe there's reason to why people say there's toxic masculinity, because there can be some very negative aspects, but these are untrained and unhoned.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think we don't always pinpoint that difference. Even just as you mentioned that, I thought, oh, you're right, because every hero movie I know has the guy gets the girl and he's the hero, but it's never through the concept of a traditional marriage, right? In very rare cases, that our movies are like that, and there's just a difference, right? And that goes back to our conversation the other day about the importance of family and how traditional values have been lost, where this is something that a father should be able to teach his children, that don't have sex before marriage and save yourself for your spouse, which is a totally out there idea in today's world, right?
Yeah.
In today's society, you're supposed to have sex before you get married to make sure that it's going to work for whenever you are married,
drove your
right?
Car, yeah.
Exactly, and that's not how God intended for it to be. So there's so many things that I think we are losing manhood and losing our self-respect as men, because there is a lack of appropriate father figures in society and in our own homes. The world has said men inherently are toxic now, and anything masculine is a negative thing. And there are people that have taken that and totally rejected it and said that's not the case, and so we're going to accept everything that is masculine and promote that as a good thing. And then that ends up actually falling into place with the toxic side, where men say, the feminist movement says men are sexist bigots and they are presiding over us in a way that is dominance and is oppressing, and so men say no, we're gonna be everything opposite of that, and we're going to we're just gonna shy away from society and say, you know what, clearly you don't need us, we're going to step back, and I'm just not going to fulfill my role as a man. And I think maybe that's kind of where you were going with that.
As the feminists push this idea that masculinity is a bad thing, then yes, it turns men, rather than training those masculine traits,
right,
like what you said at the beginning, we are avoiding any masculine traits at all and feminizing men. And to some degree, I think men can be tricked into this view of life and think, oh, I need to be more feminine. In fact, many of the caricatures of Christ have become very feminine as well. And there's this feminine virtues, and then there's these masculine virtues, but because we're just calling them non-virtues, we reject them, and not honing those skills and becoming pansy men.
I love it, because that's true. I mean, right? That is what it is. And it's not to say that femininity is a bad thing, right? But when used in the context of manhood, where men are inherently designed to be masculine, not feminine, then it's a reversal of the roles. And we've talked a lot about that, right? The reversal of words, the change in language. And so our modern day Babylon society is trying to change manhood into womanhood, right? You see that in the trans movement, where men can become women and women can become men, and the roles are the lines are being blurred into what this means versus that means, and when men are women should be more in the workplace, and women should be out of the home less because that should be more equal to men. And again, none of those things are necessarily in and of itself a bad thing. Like if your wife wants to go out and work, great. She's helping improve your family income and supporting the family. But when we apply it to society as a whole, then the standards are going to deteriorate, and that's where you start to have more issues, because the standard should be the standard. That should be the goal, the ideal, right? There will always be certain exceptions and outliers in every situation. Not every family is perfect. And, you've got a single father or a single mother that's going to kind of naturally have to take on some of the roles of both sides. But the ideal, the standard, should still be there, right?
I think that I fell into this lie a little bit in my own life growing up, feeling like there were certain parts of my nature that I needed to quiet or hush or shun. And even in married life, aspects of, natural aspects of my courageous nature or my nature of being a little bit brazen or a little bit harsh at times, right? That I felt like, and certainly there are some situations I do need to dampen those a little bit. However, in my married life, it's been interesting to see my wife like those things and gain some of her courage from those things, if that makes sense. It wasn't until I'd been married for several years when even just physique and like having some muscle or like working on that type of thing, it was like my wife like really liked that, which was just kind of funny to me because I never really didn't think of her as being the type of person that would like that. But when I was strong, when I was able to be dominant physically, that was something that was very positive in her eyes. Yeah. Anyway, just something that, as I said, I think I was caught a little bit in that as well.
Well, and I think you feed off of each other, right? And I think of maybe the less physical or the less manly side of a relationship, where it wasn't until I got married that I realized that I'm a big baby and I cry a lot. Right? When, movies hit me just a different way now, and when there's just that emotional moment, usually it's with kids. If there's a sad story or just an inspiring story, I feel it a little bit different. And I don't know what it is about being married that has done that to me, but I am more emotional than I was prior to marriage. And that's something that I don't typically attribute as a manly aspect of my man card goes out the window whenever I start crying in a movie, right? But that's not to say that I am not a masculine man. It's a side, like you said, Christ has all these attributes, and whether one's manly or feminine, we all have some of that in us, right? And it's important to be able to recognize that and hone it. Now if I started bawling my eyes out every time we had to make a decision in our family, or just was an emotional wreck anytime something happened and my wife was having to take control of every situation because I just couldn't hack it, well, that's a different story, right? That's a different side of my emotional state. And so that we want to be able to train those, and me being open with my emotions has allowed my wife to connect with me more, which is something that typically women want to connect more with those around them, especially their spouse. And so for us, that has been a good thing, because she can see that, oh, I do have feelings and I can share them.
And it's something that doesn't come as naturally for men in many cases.
Right.
And because of that, it means even more when we attempt and try and do achieve some of those various virtues that you might not consider as masculine in nature, right? Like we are striving to blend and be one, so the issue that I take is that the idea that there's no differences, right? Like, okay, there are clearly differences between men and women in general. Now, to say that every difference is good is not right, and to say that every difference is bad is not right. There are some that are good and some are not, and we need to blend and work together with our spouses to achieve perfection.
Right.
But that is a process. It is something that takes time, and we shouldn't judge others. And but by the same token, why are we talking about this? Is because there is an ideal, and if we lose the ideal, then all you have left is margins. And then there's no grounding, if that makes sense. We have to be grounded. There has to be some sort of foundation, and we have to be okay with some people on the margins, because there's always going to be people on the margins.
That's reality.
But if you're going to say, well, we can't have an ideal because that marginalizes the people outside, well, then all you're left with is a margin, and that's when societies then crumble, because there's no grounding spot. Yep. And you have to have that grounding spot. And so men, I go back to the roles, right? Men and women, and a lot of people are really bucking at these roles. They don't like the idea that, in a marriage, a man is to preside or to provide or protect, and the woman is to nurture. That they view these as being opposed to one another, and in most cases, it's a diminishing of the woman, right? And I think
at least that's how it's spun, right? That's how society, the world spins that narrative, right?
And I think that stems clearly from assumptions that we bring to the table from the culture that we live in, that are very false and not God-given assumptions. So in some ways, the culture is saying men need to be less manly and women need to fill the role of the man.
Pretty much.
Which is kind of counterintuitive. It's like, wait, what?
But when you say it like that, then you can see the problem with it. But that's not the way people typically say it. Normally, it's just men need to stop being toxic masculine men and need to allow women to have more equality in the workforce and in society as a whole. And when you say it that way, then it's like, oh, well, yeah, we should bring women more in. Like the feminist movement makes sense. We want to be equal. We want to have all these opportunities for men and women to be on a level playing ground. But that's not exactly what's actually being done, right? Mm-hmm. It's we're taking men out of their roles and not giving them a different place to be. It's just saying, don't do this, don't be here. That's you're taking that spot away from a woman. But then where's the man supposed to go? What's he supposed to do instead of that? Mm-hmm. And that solution is not being given, right? And instead it's just promoting the feminist movement, which again, I'm not opposed to femininity and women having equal rights.
There are positive aspects of
that's good, but not giving a man his role or a place to go is totally diminishing the men and promoting only the women, and then in and of itself is defeating the whole purpose of equality, right?
And I really don't want to be married to a manly woman. I'm just saying. I mean,
And I would say, this is a guess, but I think most women would say they don't want to be married to a feminine man, right?
Yeah.
It's just natural. It's normal. That is how we were created. That's just the way it is.
And so we need to be able to embrace our differences without being overly critical of the differences, and recognize that these differences are divinely attuned, and that our happiness is going to be best when we align ourselves with that divine ideal. Mm-hmm. Where it gets tricky, I think, is that we like to focus on narrow things and then judge people based on, you're doing this specific thing and you're doing this specific thing. There are basic principles, core principles, but when you get into the nitty-gritty of, this isn't a masculine thing and this is a feminine thing and this isn't a, if you start honing in on nitpicking in different things, then you're just going to judge every different character and say, well, you're not fulfilling the feminine role here, or you're not doing this role. But the trick is that parents have a divine commission to raise their children in love and righteousness. Women are more attuned to the nurturing of their children. Right. Men are more in tune with being providers and protectors, and it's good for men to preside in the home as a spiritual leader and guide in the home. Now, obviously, these are shared responsibilities, and we do work together, and that's why we can't judge each specific situation.
Right.
But just because we can't judge each specific situation doesn't mean that we can't hold to the broader generalities of
that standard, that
exactly.
ideal. Right. You mentioned something about being grounded in something, and this is where our faith in Christ comes into play. I think that when you're grounded in the doctrine, in Christ's teachings and what the scriptures say, then, in my opinion, it's pretty obvious the roles that men and women should have in a marriage. So, just as we, let's talk about presiding for a moment. Just as Christ submitted, let me start over. The scriptures tell women to submit to their husband, right? And in today's world, when we talk about, my wife should submit to me, then there's kind of a negative connotation of that, right? Where it gives off the feeling that I have this dominance and she is oppressed because she's only there to serve me. I have that role of being her Lord and King rather than a partner.
Which I just want to say that basic assumption right there in modern society is totally false.
100%, right? But if you take it into a scriptural context, and the Savior taught in parables and comparisons all the time, he also taught that a wife should submit to her husband the same that the church should submit to him, right? Because that's one of the analogies is Christ and the church are married, right? There's a marriage relationship. And if we have that more eternal perspective of what that relationship actually means, to be submissive to one another, then it's not that one is better than the other. Just like the Savior submitted to the will of the Father to perform the atonement, right? That doesn't mean that he is a lesser being than the Father because he submitted to the Father. No, in fact, the scriptures are pretty blatantly, they're blunt about how they are equal, right?
They are one.
They are one, in purpose and because of that, the submission to the Father does not mean the same thing that we typically think of as submission, husband and wife, right? It's a willingness to participate in a togetherness in one goal, and I think that is where it's that shift of language that doesn't mean man is better than woman. It just means that man has that responsibility, and men and women together can create that track to achieve their success, to achieve that greatness.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think it's important to recognize that while we say that men preside in the home, and they do when they're there, who presides when the man is gone?
Right. In my opinion, it'd be the wife. Right?
It is, and that's the proper order of things. And once again, God is a God of order, and so we shouldn't buck at that order. We shouldn't try to push back on that order. We should try to live and embrace and live within that order.
Yep.
And when we can properly live within that order, that's when God will turn us into the most glorious thing that he can, to become more like him and his son. That's good.
So a couple more thoughts on presiding, just because we're on this topic. This is something I recently learned. I think I've always known this, but I hadn't clicked with me until we were kind of talking about this topic. But who was given the first commandment or instruction? What person was given the first commandment? Do you know? Or instruction, let's just say, from God.
Multiplying and replenishing the earth and I mean, I know what those
Yeah.
are, but
So,
it was just to
was
Adam,
it to
right?
Adam and Eve, or was it just to Adam? It was just to Adam.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I had really
Mm.
that had clicked with me. Is that Adam received the first instruction of what to do, to go into the garden and take care of the garden, and then after he received that instruction, then he was given Eve as his helpmate, right? And was then commanded to multiply and replenish the earth, and they were at that point formed into a union to,
Mm-hmm.
and they're our first parents, right? That's
Yeah.
and then when Eve partook of the fruit, who was it that got in trouble? It wasn't Eve, it was Adam, and God came back and asked Adam, why did you partake of the fruit? It wasn't because he didn't see Eve as lesser. It was because he had given Adam that first instruction. Adam should have known better, and he was the one that was given the instruction. And what I take away from that little snippet of the creation story is that men from the beginning of time, from the time of Adam, have been given the role to be the ones responsible for the family unit. And that responsibility does not mean an oppression or dominance over the family or the wife. But what it means is there is an honor and a responsibility that men hold to be the leading figure that direct the family in the paths of righteousness. And as I think about this, I think about this movement to take away men's role as fathers and diminish that and promote up women to overcome that oppression, right? And by doing so, that takes away the man's responsibility, and then the men don't have any responsibility. What else are they going to do, right? Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that Adam was the most accountable. That was who, when God had a question and needed answering, well, why did this happen? He went to Adam, right? And yeah, he discussed with Eve, and there were consequences for both of them.
Right.
So it's not like she was unaccountable for anything, right?
Adam was not the only one that had the responsibility or the consequences for the actions.
However, I think that their story also illustrates just human nature and some of the natural differences between men and women, and why maybe this ideal is important. Is Eve really was the leader in that she was the first to partake of the fruit. Right. And this is something that I think through most of Christendom has been misunderstood. The idea that we are all fallen because of Eve's sin, and that this was a sin, this was not a part of God's plan, and that this is the first evil that entered into the world, and women have kind of gotten bad flack for that since the beginning of time. And it's modern revelation and the restored gospel of Jesus Christ that restored the idea and understanding that actually this was a part of God's plan, that this was how mankind could come to earth and receive bodies and go through a mortal probation to learn and to grow and to develop, and that this was a necessary step, that we honor Eve for the courage to take that first step. And that then, so we also know that they were not able to have children prior to this. They had been commanded to have children, but could not have children due to the innocent state in which they lived. And now, what does Adam say when she partakes of the fruit? Why is it that he partakes of the fruit? It's that man may be.
Man could be.
Right? So Eve was kind of this leader figure, if you will, but then welcomed Adam and said, she was the one that went to Adam and said, come join me, be united with me, and be one with me, that we can have offspring. And she invited him into that sexual relationship but not just willy-nilly sexual relationship, into this covenant loyalty and devotion and say, I will have children with you, but you need to be my head. You need to be the source of goodness and light and truth. And she welcomed him into this covenant relationship, honoring him as the presider. And I think that we as men often need to be
pushed along a little bit,
and led into that to fully develop that manhood. Does that make sense? Husbands and fathers, like as boys, we will very naturally go to the lowest common denominator. But maybe in part because of our sexual drive, if a woman is going to commit herself to us, we will move heaven and earth to make that happen, right? And so but then that builds and strengthens us, and then we mature to the point where maybe we don't need to be welcomed into it because we've developed that, but due to our natural inclinations and sexuality and otherwise, and I think that's where so much has been messed up in modern sexuality, and that women have just been told, be free with your bodies, and then they're no longer the gatekeeper of sexuality, and so then men feel like, well, we can just go have sex at any time and anywhere we want,
right.
And so why do I need to commit to anything, as opposed to using that as I hesitate to say as a bargaining chip, because I don't think sex should be a bargaining chip, but at the same time, from a covenantal, like welcoming somebody into this unifying and intimate relationship with just these two people, I think that is a valuable part of it.
For sure. Well, one of the things that really sticks out to me in this story is Adam's recognition of his responsibility. There's that moment where he knows Eve has taken the fruit, and he knows that they have made a mistake, that she has gone against what God has commanded him to do by taking the fruit, and he has to make that decision, and he realizes that in order to keep God's commandment to multiply and replenish the earth, he's going to have to follow Eve's actions and continue to do and partake of the fruit himself. And he does so, he sacrifices that part of him to fulfill his responsibility as a husband and as a father, so that he can have children. And that's one of the things that I think is largely missing in our world today, is the sacrifice that we as men need to be willing to give up to fulfill our roles. That's we've talked a lot about selfishness, right? Our society, our world is all about me. And that is the opposite of what a man is supposed to be. For me, in my mind, a truly manly man is much more worried about what he can do for others, specifically his wife and his children, than he will ever be concerned about his own well-being. And that is, I think Adam's story is a great example of that, how he sacrificed his innocence to protect Eve and to have children and to further mankind and continue to obey the rest of God's commandments in a righteous obedience.
So, somewhat related, this just reminds me a couple months ago when there was the shooting at the LDS church, and we were all grieving with that for a period of time, just recognizing how horrible that would be.
Yeah.
And I was thinking through the experiences that those people had in an active shooter type situation, and I thought specifically of the very first people, because the shooter ran his truck into the building, and there was a group of men who wanted to help this person. They didn't realize it was an active shooter situation. They just thought some guy ran off the road and he hit our building. He's probably hurt and needs medical attention or whatnot. And so they ran around to help this person, and that was the first casualty of death, was the person that was actually going to help in this situation.
Yeah.
And I thought about that as such a masculine trait of one, to protect and to serve. But I would certainly hope that if I were ever in a similar situation, you after the fact, you can say, oh, he should have just ran. Like, he should have been,
Right.
he could have saved himself and not gotten hurt. It's like, well, yeah, but then where was his manhood then?
Right.
Like I would rather be the man who suffers severe consequences for doing what was right and doing what if I really thought this person needed help and needed my help right away, I really hope that I'm the type of man who would do that, even knowing that it might get me killed.
Yeah.
Right. That sacrifice. And that's not something that I would actually put on women. If knowing that there were men and women there, I would hope that the men would hold their women back and clear the situation before their wives went to do that.
There is a certain type of pride, that we should be taking as men. I know in the past we've talked about how pride is one of the seven deadly sins. So I'm going to talk about our righteous pride here for a moment. And maybe a different word for this would be honor.
Mm-hmm.
That there's just we don't have a sense of honor in our culture like that used to, way back when. You read in the scriptures, and when someone said, I give you my word that I'm going to do this, it was a binding contract. They didn't need a legal system. They didn't need, an actual contract written down and signed. If I said, I'm going to say something to you and I'm going to do this, you knew that I was going to do it. And our culture today that's not the case, right? There's an honor that we lack now of and a pride of who I am and what I can be, what I can become. That I think also to kind of go on a side tangent here for a moment is it's you can see this in our lack of patriotism in our country, right? There's a lack of honor and pride, national pride, in being an American, being excited about waving the American flag and promoting our troops and promoting good American values. Part of that is because American values have been so corrupted and blurred that we don't even know what our American values are anymore. They used to be good, wholesome Christian values that were meant to, promote freedom and this drive to build up oneself and one's community and provide a good opportunity for the next generation. And now those lines have been blurred so much that we don't care about the next generation. We care about ourselves, and that leads to a lack of national pride, a lack of honorable people who are willing to stand up and say, no, this is right, so that's what I'm going to do, rather than let me step back. I'm a little nervous about this situation, so let somebody else deal with it.
And we're okay judging people as doing something for their best self-interest as opposed to doing what's honorable.
Yep.
Honesty is, what should be the best policy in all situations. We just say, oh, well, if it's going to hurt you, then you probably should just do what's
not
going
worth
to help
it.
you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's something that's been on my mind a lot. Is a lack of pride, and I feel like I'm a very old soul when it comes to especially American patriotism. I get the goosebumps every time I listen to the national anthem, and I can feel the importance of that. And as we're talking today about manhood and the importance of it, I want to feel that same way about the importance of our role as a husband and as a father, because it is an honorable thing and it should be something that we should look forward to doing, and we should look forward to that opportunity to have children and lead up the next generation and teach our sons and daughters about how to be good members of society and how to be honorable and respectful and kind and be builders of those around you rather than let somebody else take care of it for me.
Yeah. Which is how we see it in much of society now, is like we mentioned, the feminist movement has become very, very strong and basically told men, you're being too manly, and so become more feminine. But then they're not really fulfilling any role in society, and so they're the number of men who are not even in the workforce, let alone the armed forces, or have you heard the stats on what percentage of men actually qualify the physical requirements for the military?
No, I'm sure I'm not going to be surprised by it though.
And the exact number, it was between 40 and 60%. I think it was more than 50%. I think it was 60%. You can double check me on this, but it's a significant number of people that do not qualify for the physical standards of being in the military. And maybe just touching on this military aspect, because we've had peace for a long time in America, at least relative peace for the individual. I mean, I know there's been lots of wars that the country's been in, but they're all far and remote, and we are not directly connected to them. And there's so much misdirection and misinformation and understanding of things that it's really hard to justify.
Yeah.
And for the most part, most of the recent wars we've been in, there's kind of a negative view of a lot of those, and we shouldn't be in war at all or doing these things. But then there's true honor and virtue in fighting for real, true principles. And because there really is evil in this world, and people who do want to destroy what America stands for in its greatest ideals. And we do need to fight for that. And Scripture would indicate that we can and should fight for that. And I think in a lower, not a physical way, that's kind of what we've been moved to with this podcast, is this manly attribute of being courageous and being able to stand for something and feel reverence and honor for good, true, wholesome things, and being willing to have the guts to say it. That we need more manly men who are willing to do tough, hard things, to sacrifice their whole self, their whole life in the pursuit of their wives, their children, and their liberty, and their faith. And if we have men who can honorably, selflessly do that, we will be such a better people, a better nation. But it takes all men striving to do that. And I think that if we see more men doing that, there will be this groundswell of people who have grown up. Because as I mentioned earlier, there are things in my life that I grew up with, and I grew up in a very good home. I can't complain about my childhood at all. I had a beautiful childhood, and yet even so, in the culture and world that we live in, I had some incorrect perceptions of what manhood really was and is, and I'm sure I still do. And we need to learn those and be humble enough to accept those and to grow from those and to really develop the best parts of those, to really hone or mature those parts of our soul.
And that's what I see us doing is always learning, always becoming better. That being a good father and a good husband is not about me, but it's about my family and my wife, my children, and who I can help them become. And the we mentioned earlier at the very beginning about the fringes, right? And the lack of an ideal. If we can bring that ideal back, then the margins, or those people that are on the fringes, some may come back to the ideal, and if they don't, then that's something that will get left behind, right? But if we allow the margins to grow and to step away from the ideal, and as a whole we go away from the margin, or from the ideal standard, then the ideal standard becomes the margin. It becomes the fringe, and it reverses that role. And that's what we are hoping that we can spread a light to, is bringing that ideal, that standard back, so that we can have a security, a peace, a self-respect, and honor that will drive us to a better future, not just for us, but for the people that are coming after us, our children, right?
And that self-sacrifice needs to not just be about me. True manhood is rooted in the man of men, which is Christ and our Heavenly Father. And we do want to become more like him. So maybe one brief tangent here to kind of close us out. And that is, I think that Christ has been overly feminized to men. And I think a lot of men don't relate to Christ as well as a lot of women relate to Christ, because in many aspects I feel like Christ has been this teddy bear Jesus concept, right? Yeah. Where he's nice, and he never says anything that's hurtful or harmful, that he just wants you to feel good and be your best self, and to you be you. Like, really, those are terms that modern Christians use when we describe Christ. And I've been to a few places where big men will get up and say, Jesus loves you, and he's going to give you a big hug, and he's going to, like, these things which, like, honestly, like, I don't know that men naturally appeal to that type of language. And yet when you actually get into the scriptures and really look at Christ's life, while he certainly does have feminine attributes that women can learn from as well, there are so many true attributes of manhood that we should really be taking. The courage, I mean, the fact that he died in the pursuit of teaching and seeking truth, his ultimate sacrifice, in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he took upon himself the sins and the sufferings of all mankind, like, that is the type of self-sacrifice that we want to embody, right? And that we want to be. And so I just think that we need to be careful. And maybe this is a reason why we meet together on Sundays and sometimes divide as men and as women, because we do view things from a different perspective. But far too often I feel like we portray all these feminine traits onto Jesus because they feel good, when sometimes it's important to really spell out and specify the masculine traits that he had too. That's
where we tend to grow the most as men, specifically when we're called out. And there's two routes. You get called out for something, called to repentance, and you can either have the unrighteous pride and not humble yourself to a point where it makes you withdraw, or you can take that and improve upon yourself and grow and become a better person. And that's what Christ taught, was improving oneself, becoming a better person, becoming more Christ-like in your femininity and your masculinity, and becoming more like him. The overarching idea that I've come away with as we've been discussing is, I need to be more like Christ, and I need to be more courageous in self-sacrifice. And as I do that, I will find a greater happiness in my own life, as I get to see that growth and that happiness and that self-respect in my family.
So let's do it together. Let's be manly men and sacrifice for those things that matter most, our families, our wives, our faith, our freedom.
If you feel like you're missing some manhood in your life, like and subscribe and share this with those around you to help promote this idea and these good moral values. And let's take that bushel out of the picture and light those fires so that we can continue to spread good, courageous values.
The fire of a righteous resistance.
We'll see y'all next time.
This is the No Bushel Podcast.